Golden Black Live, Mike DeCourcy joins us, and he's always gracious with his time. I don't know if he's swearing at us under his breath because we made him hold on here a little bit. But Mike, welcome to the show. I know you've done it a couple times before. It's always great to have you on. Where are you at this? You got studio duty this weekend, I assume. But where are you calling from as you speak?
I'm in Indianapolis, Fishers actually, in my home office. I'll be leaving for Chicago for the weekend to do our pregame show tomorrow and halftimes of our games, and then of course the finale. And then on Sunday we have some more games and BTN basketball and beyond on Sunday evening.
You know, it's one of the great things about being in central Indiana. You go from a 50-degree day yesterday, well, about 10 below zero by the time you're driving back, if that's where you're coming back on Sunday. But Mike, what we saw last night, a team in Iowa that is just becoming a wrecking ball and maybe the favorite to. I know they have a tough schedule, some tough games coming up, obviously, but this is a very, very good basketball team. Tell us kind of how you handicap maybe the first third, though we're not completely up to the first third of the Big Ten race at this point.
Yeah, I guess we're really not even up to a quarter of it.
Yeah.
We're through 4 games, and Iowa has done an amazing job in that period to already have 3 victories over teams that would be considered upper echelon. I think it's pretty clear we have some really special teams in the league in Michigan State and Maryland and Purdue, and I think Iowa is becoming one of those, and Indiana still has the potential to do that. And then I think Michigan is an NCAA team, and then everybody else is kind of fighting to see if they can, add another bid or two to the league. But to be able to be positioned to be 4-0 with 3 great wins is wonderful for Iowa. But in reality, I mean, in a league race, what that does is it does sort of clear your path a little bit, but it doesn't get you all the way there. You still have to beat the guys that are just good or not that good. And we all know that in any league, you go on the road and you don't bring it, and you can lose to one of the teams that isn't particularly special. So Iowa's got a long road ahead of it to take a great shot at winning the conference, but they certainly have done a wonderful job to this point.
Yeah.
Mike, hey, what's surprised you about the way the Big Ten season through 5 games or however many it's been? What surprised you relative to maybe what you expected before the season or during non-conference?
Well, I mean, we just discussed it. Frankly, when we got done with non-conference, I thought there were 3 teams that could win the league. And I thought Michigan State, honestly, would be the one because their schedule just set it up so nicely for them relative to Purdue and to Maryland's.
Yeah.
Michigan State's schedule, although Iowa has taken its turn making it more difficult, Michigan State's schedule looked much less imposing in when the season began or through pre-conference than the other 2, and so I thought that would get them home. The surprising thing is that Iowa has made itself into a serious contender. I'm not surprised that Indiana is turning a corner here. We picked them 15th in the country for a reason. We thought they had this in them. Mm-hmm. I give them credit for not relenting after a pretty poor performance in Maui. They've come on from that and have improved, and they didn't use James Blackman's injury as an excuse. They used it as fuel to get better. They are a much better basketball team today than they were the last day James Blackman played. So I think that from that standpoint, we maybe have, 5 legit contenders for the league. And Indiana's schedule is really a breeze relative to the others until we get to February. Then it toughens up. February is going to be a real tough one for Indiana. They have to continue to take advantage of the opportunities that are given to them now. They can't say, "Oh, well, we're in great shape, so we can relax." No, they have to keep driving. 1, to get better, and 2, to not let this easier schedule to not take full advantage of it.
Yeah, Michigan, we talked in the last segment, Michigan State only plays Maryland, Michigan, IU, and Purdue just once. and is an advantage, of course, Indiana, only Michigan State, Maryland, and Purdue once, and not until February. So that's a big part of things as well. Looking at Purdue, and you've seen the Boilermakers several times this year. What strikes you? We've seen some flaws after the 11-0 start. The 3 losses have gotten the attention not only of the fan base, but I'm sure opposing coaches and how you take on the Boilermakers. What do you see? What are you seeing as you watch Purdue run up and down the court?
Yeah, it's what's funny about it. I mean, the problem that we're seeing isn't any different than the one we expected they would have in when the season began, which is will they have enough good point guard play to succeed, to excel, I guess, more than anything. And the funny thing is that a lot of the time, Johnny Hill and P.J. Thompson have played good basketball without it necessarily translating to them being good point guards for this team. I mean, they've been fine players, but they haven't been in command. That's what I've seen missing as much as anything from when Purdue has struggled, is that whoever is in the game in charge hasn't really been in command. And when things go badly, you don't see a serious effort to fix it on the floor. I mean, you see it from the bench, obviously. You got a great coach. But you don't see that on the floor, this is what we have to do to make this stop. You just see guys continuing to play. And I think that's the difference right now for Purdue. They have to get to a point where when things get difficult, something or someone has to say, okay, this is how we get through this problem. That basketball is a series of solving problems that develop. The opposing team is trying to cause problems for you. And your job is not just to play, but to play over the obstacles. And when the obstacles have hit Purdue, we haven't seen that response. And I think that's when they find a way to get that done, whether it's those 2 guys stepping up or just moving to a different approach, maybe with Dakota Mathias or whatever it might be, they have to find that. Or at some point, they're going to win a lot of games. They're really talented and they play really hard and they're well coached. They're going to win a lot of games. But the game to win the conference championship, will they have the stuff to get through that obstacle, or the game to win the Big Ten tournament, or the game in the NCAA where somebody puts a run on them or makes a defensive switch like Iowa did? How do they respond to that? And I don't feel great confidence yet that those 2 guys or anyone else on the team is dragging them through the difficult spot. And again, it doesn't necessarily just have to be the point guard. It could be somebody else, but obviously it helps when it is the point guard.
Yeah.
Mike, how curious were you to see how this was going to work at Purdue? Obviously, much has been made about the game at all levels getting smaller and smaller. Purdue's putting like a 1985 power forward now next to 2 7-footers, playing the game much bigger, kind of going against the grain. How curious, I guess, were you to see how that was going to work in this day and age?
Much interested in that, and when people started celebrating about the great front line when Caleb signed, I was skeptical. I admit that because of the way the game has changed, and because of I'll be frank. I mean, as much progress as Caleb made from when he was an 8th or 9th grader when I first saw him to where he was even at the end of last year, you'd think, okay, well, that guy's going to struggle to guard college power forwards, especially with the way the game's going. But that guy didn't show up at Purdue, or he showed up in even better shape than he'd already gotten himself to. So Caleb's feet aren't a huge problem. I mean, he moves well. He's in great shape. I've said this before. Caleb Swanigan has improved his body more from the first time I saw him to now than any player I've ever encountered. And I give him so much credit for that. And that's why he's going to be a pro, and he's going to be a good one, because he works unbelievably hard at both his conditioning and his skill level. He's a very good player, and he's got a chance to be a great one. And I admire the heck out of him, and so and he's the reason this is working. I mean, Vince, I wondered if taking Vince from being a really tough matchup at the 4 spot to being, a guy who is just a very athletic 3-man, I wondered if that would be the best thing for him. He's handled it fine. And AJ, of course, and Isaac are fine. I mean, they're terrific. So the guy who had to make it work was Caleb, and he has worked so hard that it has worked.
Much was made this week about the new NBA draft situation where players now have more time to kind of test the water, so to speak, like they did in the past. How do you see that kind of impacting things that might be relevant to Purdue here in a couple months?
Well, I think that I think it's really good. First of all, you don't even have to. You can even do it more than once. So if Caleb or Isaac or someone like that were to put his name on the list, it wouldn't even have to be like, okay, you have to make sure you do it at the exact right time, because if you do it once and it's the wrong time, then you maybe don't really get the information that is germane to you. They can do it, and they can if they choose, and if they happen to mistime it, well, they get another shot the next year. Right. So I think from that standpoint, it's good for the teams. Maybe even good for the players. I'm not sure that you really need multiple times, but if you have them, you're probably going to see a lot of players in the draft. Making it the multiple times is really going to flood the camps, so to speak. Teams are going to have to be pretty judicious about who they do and don't bring in. The combine is going to be pretty selective, so if you don't get an invite to the combine, you probably are going to have a tough time getting picked. But all that said, I think that overall this rule change shouldn't have ever happened, because the old rule change should have never happened. Yeah. We had a fine rule before. We didn't need to make it easier for the college coaches. We need to make it as good as you can for the players.
No question.
And you have that situation too. One of the flavor of the month comments, as we switch gears a little bit, about on the national scene, Mike, is that there is no Duke, Wisconsin, Kentucky from last year. This has been one of the more homogeneous, if not even keeled, even playing fields for a national championship this year. Do you subscribe to that theory? And does that make for a great March, or does that make for some challenges in terms of where are you going to have great basketball in March?
I might have written that theory. I certainly was among those who were saying it. And I think all of us who evaluate this stuff, when we sat down last spring, around the time of the national championship game or immediately after, and you start to look through, and you're like, oh boy, who do we not? In terms of picking a number one team, who do we not hate? Yeah. I mean, it was hard, and we settled on Kansas. And they've played some really good basketball, but not perfect. Yeah. And some other people went with Carolina, and Maryland got some picks, and I think Kentucky did maybe. But you see all of those teams have flaws, some significant flaws, some a little less so. And then there are other teams that can kind of meet their level. So I think it's going to make it a blast. I really do. I don't know. Who knows? You never know. We could even with 4 number one seeds that don't rise to the level of past years, who knows? We could end up with 3 or 4 number ones in the Final Four. But that won't make them great. The one time we had 4 number ones, they were great. 2008, those teams were titanic, a lot like we had last year. But I do think it's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot harder to pick a bracket. It'll be a lot harder for the teams that are high seeded to survive, and it'll be a lot harder to pick a champion even when we get to March.
In the story, the last question for you, and the story that Purdue fans want to hear is, all right, what does it take? We talked about point guard play, but is it still that? Is it Swanigan bringing his game up for Purdue to be in that conversation, or is it also matchups and draw in terms of looking at Purdue as an NCAA tournament team? I know it's only January the 15th, so it's certainly a work in progress.
Absolutely, but that's the whole point. I mean, you've got 2 months to get ready for that, and so what do you do with those 2 months? And I think that the biggest thing will be finding more flow from point guard, and being able to when teams change things up on you, being able to fight through that. When the runs go against you, being able to generate offense under that kind of pressure. I think those kinds of things have to happen. But this team's on a great course. They're playing very good basketball. They have obvious flaws that no one's surprised by. But they have some strengths that no one saw coming. As I said, Caleb's mobility, Ryan Klein, the weapon that he can become. So I think from that standpoint, there's a lot of potential there, and they have to use these 2 months to figure out how best to play that point guard situation, who they can trust the most, what do they want out of it? Are they more concerned at the defensive end or the offensive end? All those elements, they've got 2 months to figure out, and a lot of really good competition to polish that against.
All right, Mike, thanks so much for your time. Safe travels up to Chicago, and I'm sure we'll see you down the road. We always appreciate you taking the time to stop by.
Pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. All right, we're going to take a 2-minute break. Ken Double will come in. We'll shoo Brian out. They might shake hands on the way past each other. That'd be a good thing. But other than that, we'll look forward to having Ken. We'll talk a lot of things. Basketball, we'll talk about Theater Oregon, we'll talk about Clayton Richard, baseball. Ken and I are a long time friends. We're just going to be act like we're at the Triple X having a little breakfast. So we'll do that. All right, we'll see you in a couple minutes, and we'll see you shortly on Golden Black Live.